My name is Eva Rostova, and at 29, my world revolved around the sizzle of onions in hot butter, the comforting aroma of freshly baked pie, and the warm, welcoming glow of the Starlight Diner. It wasn't just any diner. It was a cherished, though tragically neglected institution in my hometown of Harmony Creek, a place where generations had shared laughter, shed tears, and celebrated life's small victories over thick milkshakes and hearty home-style meals. I'd grown up hearing my grandparents reminisce about their first date in one of its worn vinyl booths, about the legendary Starlight Burger and the kindness of its original owners. When the opportunity arose to take over its lease, the diner having stood dark, dusty, and silent for nearly a decade, a mournful symbol of Harmony Creek's own slow, quiet decline, I poured every cent of my life savings, along with a modest, nervously offered loan from my supportive, if somewhat apprehensive parents, into bringing it back to life. My dream was beautifully, deceptively simple: to revive the Starlight, to polish its faded chrome, to fill its empty seats once more with the comforting murmur of community, serving up modern comfort food, crafted with love and fresh, locally sourced ingredients. It was to be a beacon of warmth, a place where good food and good company could once again weave their magic, honoring its past while creating a vibrant future for a new generation. But I never ever, in my most hopeful, flower-dusted imaginings, conceived that the greatest, most insidious threat to this heartfelt dream would come not from the usual challenges of the restaurant business, but from the very man who held the keys to its physical existence, my charming, outwardly avuncular, and utterly ruthless landlord, Mr. Silas Croft. The memory of his initial encouraging smile, his subsequent chilling, calculated campaign of sabotage, and the almost gleeful contempt he showed for the community I was trying to serve, still leaves a bitter, indigestible taste of betrayal in my mouth. Before I take you on a culinary journey through the rise, near fall, and ultimate defiant resurgence of the Starlight Diner, before I unravel the infuriating, heartbreaking story of how a greedy, manipulative landlord systematically tried to destroy everything I had poured my heart and soul into, all for the sake of a cold, soulless luxury development. And before I recount the inspiring against-the-odds battle my loyal staff, our incredible customers, and I waged to save our beloved community hub, a fight that culminated in a public showdown that left Mr. Croft visibly, satisfyingly aghast, I'd be so incredibly grateful if you could let me know which cherished local spot in your own town holds a special place in your heart in the comments section below. And please, I earnestly implore you, do hit that like button if you've ever believed with every fiber of your being in the power of small, independent businesses to nurture and sustain the soul of a community, and if you've ever had to fight tooth and nail to protect something precious and deeply meaningful from the crushing, impersonal forces of greed and sway progress. The Starlight Diner, when I first signed the lease, was a ghost of its former glory. Dust lay thick as winter snow on its cracked Formica countertops. The once gleaming chrome trim was tarnished and pitted, and the iconic neon star above the entrance, the very star that had given the diner its hopeful name decades ago, flickered erratically, a pale imitation of its former vibrant glow. But beneath the layers of neglect, I saw its beautiful bones, its undeniable soul. I saw the potential for warmth, for laughter, for community. And so, with a heart full of hope and a toolbox that quickly became a permanent extension of my arm, I began the arduous, exhilarating process of resurrection. For 6 exhausting, transformative months, the Starlight Diner consumed my every waking moment, and most of my sleeping ones too. I scraped together every penny, called in every favor, learned new skills from online tutorials late into the night, plumbing, tiling, even reupholstering the worn-out vinyl on those classic booths myself, my fingers often raw and aching. My small, equally passionate team, Maria, my wonderfully talented and unflappable head, Cook, a woman whose family recipes were legendary in Harmony Creek, and Betty, our veteran waitress, whose warm smile and encyclopedic knowledge of every regular's coffee order were as vital to the Starlight as its griddle, worked alongside me, painting walls, sanding floors, their belief in my vision a constant, unwavering source of strength. We haunted flea markets and antique shops, sourcing vintage light fixtures and period-perfect salt and pepper shakers. We forged partnerships with local farmers, with the town baker, with the nearby dairy, determined that the Starlight's new menu would be a vibrant celebration of Harmony Creek's own rich agricultural bounty. Mr. Silas Croft, the owner of the entire block. The Starlight was situated on had, during those initial hectic renovation months, been a largely absent though seemingly benign figure. He was a prominent, if somewhat enigmatic businessman in Harmony Creek, a man who owned a significant portfolio of commercial and residential properties, known for his sharp suits, his smooth talk, and his rumored though never publicly proven ruthlessness in business dealings. Our initial interactions when I'd first nervously approached him about leasing the dilapidated diner space had been surprisingly, almost disarmingly pleasant. He'd listened to my passionate pitch for reviving the Starlight, a nostalgic, almost sentimental smile playing on his lips. "A commendable ambition, young lady," he'd said, his voice a low, cultured purr. "The Starlight was an icon in its day. Harmony Creek needs more spirit like yours." He'd offered me what seemed like a reasonable standard 5-year lease, with a modest, manageable rent, even throwing in a small token renovation allowance. A gesture that at the time had felt like a genuine vote of confidence. I had signed on the dotted line, my heart filled with gratitude and a naive sense of partnership. And then finally, after months of literal blood sweat and more than a few tears, the Starlight Diner reopened its doors. The transformation was, even if I say so myself, breathtaking. The chrome gleamed, the newly polished terrazzo floors shone, the repaired neon star above the entrance cast a warm, inviting, vibrant blue glow onto the once dreary street. And Harmony Creek, it seemed, had been starved for exactly what the Starlight now offered. From day one we were busy. The scent of Maria's incredible buttermilk pancakes and freshly brewed coffee once again mingled with the happy chatter of locals. Old-timers, their eyes misting with nostalgia, reclaimed their favorite booths, sharing stories of the Starlight's heyday with a new generation. Young families, drawn by our affordable, kid-friendly menu and welcoming atmosphere, filled the diner with laughter. Local business owners made it their regular lunchtime haunt. We hosted community poetry nights, featured local artists' work on our walls, even started a pay-it-forward coffee scheme for those struggling. The Starlight Diner wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was, as I had so fervently dreamed, rapidly becoming the beating, vibrant heart of Harmony Creek once more, a genuine, cherished community hub. Our local newspaper, the Harmony Creek Herald, ran a glowing front-page feature, "The Starlight Shines Again," lauding our efforts and the diner's palpable positive impact on the revitalization of our struggling downtown block. It was precisely at this point, just as the Starlight was hitting its joyful, confident stride, just as we were beginning to feel a fragile sense of security and accomplishment, that Mr. Silas Croft's demeanor began to subtly, almost imperceptibly shift. His previously rare, almost perfunctory appearances at the diner became more frequent, more evaluative. He'd linger by the counter, his sharp, appraising eyes sweeping over the bustling dining room, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. He started making unsolicited, vaguely unsettling comments about the unexpectedly high foot traffic we were generating, about how the Starlight was significantly increasing the desirability and thus the property values of the entire block. His tone was still superficially pleasant, even complimentary, but there was an undercurrent, a certain proprietary gleam in his eye that made me increasingly uneasy. Then came the first, seemingly minor, building issues. A persistent, annoying leak suddenly appeared in the ceiling above one of our busiest booths, a leak Croft's initially responsive property manager now seemed inexplicably slow, almost reluctant to address, despite my repeated, increasingly urgent calls. The ancient, temperamental electrical system, which had behaved impeccably since my own admittedly amateur but thorough rewiring efforts during the renovation, began to inexplicably trip breakers at the busiest, most inconvenient times, plunging the kitchen into darkness during the lunchtime rush. Croft, when I finally managed to get him on the phone, expressed a theatrical, almost insincere sympathy, vaguely promising to look into it. But help was never forthcoming. Instead, I found myself shelling out my own already dangerously depleted operating funds for emergency electricians and plumbers, just to keep the Starlight's doors open. The final chilling, discordant note, the one that transformed my vague unease into a cold, sickening premonition, came late one busy Friday evening. As I was cashing out, exhausted but exhilarated after a particularly successful night, I saw Mr. Croft standing across the street, not looking at the Starlight, but at the entire block his head tilted a strange, almost predatory smile on his lips. He wasn't alone. He was with two impeccably dressed strangers men who exuded an unmistakable aura of big city money and ruthless corporate efficiency. They were holding rolled-up blueprints, gesturing expansively at the Starlight, then at the adjacent struggling bookstore, then at the old empty hardware store on the corner. I couldn't hear their words, but their body language, their expressions spoke volumes. My heart sank. These were not men interested in preserving community diners or supporting local businesses. These were men who saw entire city blocks not as collections of lives and dreams, but as columns on a spreadsheet, as opportunities for demolition and lucrative soulless redevelopment. And Mr. Silas Croft, my seemingly supportive avuncular landlord, was, it appeared, enthusiastically, perhaps even gleefully showing them the lay of his land. The warm, inviting glow of the Starlight's neon star suddenly felt terribly fragile, terribly vulnerable under the cold, appraising gaze of those distant, powerful figures. My hard-won dream, I realized, with a sudden visceral lurch of my stomach, was in far greater peril than I could have ever imagined. The unsettling image of Silas Croft and his sharp-suited associates surveying the block, their expressions, a predatory blend of calculation and ambition, haunted my sleep for weeks. My initial naive hope that perhaps I had merely misinterpreted a casual business meeting quickly evaporated as Croft's demeanor towards the Starlight Diner and towards me underwent a chilling, almost reptilian transformation. The avuncular charm, the feigned nostalgia for the diner's past, vanished, replaced by a cool, appraising indifference that soon curdled into outright, albeit subtly wielded, hostility. The minor building issues I had initially dismissed as unfortunate coincidences began to escalate with alarming, almost systematic precision, each one a carefully calibrated turn of the screw designed to make our daily operations a living nightmare. First, it was the main walk-in refrigerator, which, despite having been serviced and certified just months prior during my renovations, began to inexplicably, repeatedly fail. Always, it seemed, just after a large, expensive delivery of fresh produce and dairy, Croft's property manager, a weaselly, evasive man named Jenkins, would take days, sometimes even a week, to send out a repairman, forcing us to discard thousands of dollars worth of precious, locally sourced ingredients. Maria, my unflappable head cook, was beside herself with frustration, her meticulously planned menus thrown into chaos, her dedication to quality ingredients undermined at every turn. "This isn't normal, Eva," she'd say, her usually cheerful face grim, wiping sweat from her brow in our increasingly unreliable kitchen. "This old building has its quirks, sure, but this feels like something else." Then the plumbing in the customer restrooms, ancient but previously functional, erupted in a series of spectacular business-halting disasters. First, a burst pipe that flooded the ladies' room, then a catastrophic sewage backup that filled the entire diner with an unbearable stench, forcing us to close for 2 full, agonizingly unprofitable days during a peak weekend. Each time Jenkins's response was infuriatingly slow, his excuses increasingly flimsy. We were losing money, losing customer goodwill, and my own savings, already depleted by the initial renovations, were hemorrhaging at an alarming rate to cover emergency repairs that were, by any reasonable interpretation of our lease, squarely Croft's responsibility. The final straw, the act that stripped away any lingering doubt about Croft's malicious intent, came in the form of a crisp, lawyer-drafted letter delivered by courier. It informed me, in cold, unyielding legal prose, that due to a recent comprehensive reassessment of property values and operating costs for the entire block, and pursuant to a vaguely worded, almost invisible clause in my lease agreement, Clause 17b, subsection 3, which I now cursed myself for not scrutinizing more closely with a lawyer, my monthly rent for the Starlight Diner was being increased by a staggering, crippling 300% effective the first of the following month. The letter helpfully suggested that if I found these new terms untenable, Mr. Croft would be generously willing to discuss an early termination of the lease agreement, a thinly veiled, extortionate buyout offer for a fraction of what I had poured into the Starlight. I stared at the letter, the blood draining from my face, a cold, sickening wave of despair washing over me. He wasn't just trying to make things difficult. He was actively, systematically trying to destroy me, to bleed me dry, to force me out. That evening after closing, I sat alone in a darkened booth at the Starlight, the faint lingering aroma of coffee and apple pie a heartbreaking reminder of everything I was about to lose. The weight of it all, the financial ruin, the shattered dream, the betrayal by a man I had naively trusted, felt crushing, unbearable. For a long, dark hour, I seriously contemplated just giving up, handing Croft the keys, cutting my losses, walking away from the stress, the heartache, the impossible fight. But then Betty, my veteran waitress, who had quietly stayed behind after her shift, sensing my distress, slid into the booth opposite me, her kind, careworn face etched with concern. She placed a comforting, work-roughened hand over mine. "Don't you let that greedy old buzzard win, Eva, honey," she said, her voice low but fierce, her eyes, which had seen decades of Harmony Creek's ups and downs from behind the Starlight's counter, flashing with an unexpected fire. "This diner, it ain't just a business to you or to Maria or to me. It's Harmony Creek's heart. And you, girl, you're the one who got it beating again. We ain't gonna let him rip it out without a fight. Not now. Not ever." Maria, emerging from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, nodded in silent, steely agreement, her dark eyes, usually so full of culinary passion, now glinting with a warrior's resolve. Their unwavering loyalty, their fierce, unexpected defiance was like a jolt of electricity to my own flagging spirit. My despair, so heavy just moments before, began to slowly, almost imperceptibly transmute into a cold, hard, righteous fury, a stubborn, unyielding determination. They were right. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Maria, about Betty, about our loyal staff, about our cherished customers, about the very soul of Harmony Creek. Silas Croft wanted a war, then by God, a war he would get. Our first act of organized resistance was to call a small, discreet meeting of the Starlight's most loyal, influential regular customers. There was Mr. Abernathy, a kindly, semi-retired lawyer with a sharp mind and a deep love for Maria's meatloaf. Miss Perkins, the feisty, well-connected editor of the small but respected independent community newspaper, The Harmony Creek Voice. Young David Chen, no relation to the journalist from Eris's story, just another passionate local, a tech-savvy college student who ran a popular local history blog, and a handful of other community leaders, artists, and small business owners who had all in their own ways found a second home at the Starlight. We laid out everything for them. Croft's escalating campaign of harassment, the impossible rent hike, the thinly veiled buyout offer our deep suspicion that he was trying to clear the block for a massive, soulless luxury development that would forever alter the character of our town. The reaction was immediate and unanimous outraged disbelief, and an instant, unshakable resolve to help. Mr. Abernathy, his eyes gleaming with a litigator's fire I hadn't known he possessed, offered to review my lease pro bono, searching for any loophole, any legal recourse. Miss Perkins, her journalist's instincts instantly on high alert, promised to start discreetly investigating Croft's other business dealings, his history as a landlord, any patterns of similar predatory behavior. David Chen, with his youthful energy and social media savvy, immediately proposed launching a Save the Starlight online campaign to rally public awareness and support. Within hours, our small circle of despair had transformed into the energetic, determined core of the Friends of Starlight Diner Committee. Our investigation, though initially hampered by Croft's carefully constructed walls of corporate secrecy and legal obfuscation, slowly began to bear fruit. Miss Perkins, through her network of local contacts, uncovered a trail of disgruntled former tenants from other Croft-owned properties across the county, each with a depressingly similar story of neglected maintenance, sudden inexplicable rent hikes, and eventual forced displacement, often just before the properties were mysteriously sold off to anonymous development corporations. David Chen's online research revealed that Silas Croft was indeed the primary silent partner in a newly formed shell company, Viridian Heights Luxury Developments, which had just weeks prior submitted a confidential preliminary zoning application to City Hall for a massive multi-story luxury condominium and boutique hotel complex encompassing the entire block where the Starlight Diner and several other small, long-standing local businesses currently stood. The plans, which David managed to partially glimpse through a sympathetic junior clerk at the planning office, showed the Starlight Diner and its neighboring buildings completely erased, replaced by a gleaming impersonal tower of glass and steel. While our committee worked tirelessly behind the scenes, the pressure from Croft continued to mount, becoming more overt, more aggressive. A sudden, unannounced emergency health inspection triggered, we later learned by an anonymous, entirely baseless complaint, almost certainly orchestrated by Croft himself, found a series of trivial, easily rectifiable violations that nonetheless resulted in a damaging, albeit temporary, conditional pass notice being slapped on our front window. Then a flood of suspiciously similar one-star negative online reviews, all posted within a 24-hour period by anonymous accounts with no prior review history, appeared on every major restaurant review platform, spewing fabricated claims about poor hygiene, rude staff, and substandard food. Our reputation, so carefully, lovingly built, was being deliberately, systematically attacked. The financial strain was becoming almost unbearable. Maria and Betty, bless their loyal hearts, offered to defer their wages. Some of our regular customers, hearing whispers of our struggles, started leaving extravagantly generous tips or organizing small impromptu cash mob events to support us. But it felt like we were bailing out a sinking ship with a teaspoon, while Croft relentlessly drilled fresh holes in the hull. Just as our hope was beginning to seriously dwindle, just as I was starting to draft a heartbreaking letter to my staff and customers announcing the Starlight's imminent, unavoidable closure, Mr. Abernathy, his face alight with a triumphant, almost boyish grin, burst into the diner waving a sheaf of old dusty-looking documents. "I found it, Ava. I found it," he exclaimed, his voice hoarse with excitement. A forgotten covenant, a historical landmark preservation clause buried deep within the original 1940s deed for this entire block, a clause that Silas Croft, in his arrogant haste and greed, clearly overlooked or dismissed as irrelevant. He spread the ancient, brittle papers across the counter, his finger tracing a faded, spidery line of text. The clause, almost invisible to the untrained eye, explicitly, unequivocally stipulated that any building on the block housing a continuously operating, community-focused public eatery for a period exceeding 25 years a criterion. The Starlight, even with its recent decade of darkness arguably still met due to its historical operational period, could not be demolished or substantially altered without the express written consent of a designated community heritage board. A board that Mr. Abernathy gleefully informed us had been defunct for decades, but could, with sufficient public pressure and legal petitioning, be immediately reconstituted by the City Council. It wasn't a guaranteed victory, not by a long shot. But it was a lifeline. It was a fighting chance. It was a single defiant starlight suddenly miraculously piercing through the oppressive, encroaching darkness. Mr. Abernathy's discovery of the forgotten historical covenant wasn't just a lifeline. It was a battle standard, a rallying cry that infused our beleaguered Friends of Starlight Diner Committee, FOSDC, with a jolt of renewed, almost electric energy. The dusty, century-old legalese, so easily dismissed by Silas Croft in his arrogant pursuit of profit, became our most potent weapon. Armed with this unexpected legal leverage and a burgeoning, irrepressible sense of hope, we launched a far more visible, far more aggressive public campaign to save the Starlight Diner, and by extension the very soul of our Harmony Creek downtown. Miss Perkins, the fiery editor of the Harmony Creek Voice, became our journalistic champion. She published a brilliant, hard-hitting series of front-page articles meticulously detailing the Starlight Diner's rich history, its profound significance as a community anchor for generations, the undeniable legal validity of the historical covenant Mr. Abernathy had unearthed, and with carefully worded but unmistakable implication, Silas Croft's underhanded predatory tactics to circumvent it. David Chen, our tech-savvy young historian, unleashed a viral social media blitz #Save the Starlight, #Harmony Creek Heritage, #Croft Begone, that galvanized local sentiment, showcasing heartfelt video testimonials from elderly residents sharing cherished Starlight memories, young families praising its welcoming atmosphere, and even local musicians who had gotten their start at our impromptu open mic nights. His blog posts filled with painstakingly researched historical details about the diner, and the block became required reading for anyone interested in the town's heritage. Simultaneously, our dedicated FOSDC volunteers, led by the indefatigable Maria and Betty, organized a massive petition drive, their tables adorned with "Save the Starlight" banners appearing at every local farmers market, school event, and town gathering. The signatures poured in by the thousands, a tangible, undeniable testament to Harmony Creek's deep love for its iconic diner. Silas Croft, clearly blindsided and infuriated by this sudden, well-orchestrated surge of public resistance and the unexpected legal complication of the covenant, retaliated with a ferocity that betrayed his growing desperation. Cease and desist letters from his high-powered city lawyers, filled with threats of ruinous defamation lawsuits, began arriving at the homes of Mr. Abernathy, Miss Perkins, and even me, accusing us of maliciously interfering with legitimate business interests and spreading false and damaging information. He tried to discredit Mr. Abernathy in the press, insinuating the old lawyer was senile and misinterpreting archaic, irrelevant legal documents. He even, in a particularly low blow, attempted to plant a story with a rival less scrupulous out-of-town newspaper, hinting at financial irregularities and questionable management practices at the Starlight Diner under my leadership. A desperate, transparently false accusation that, thanks to Miss Perkins's swift and public rebuttal in the Harmony Creek Voice, thankfully failed to gain any traction. But his aggression, his attempts at intimidation, only served to further galvanize our support, to harden our resolve. Harmony Creek, it seemed, had finally had enough of Silas Croft's bullying. The undeniable, overwhelming groundswell of public opinion, coupled with the clear legal standing of the historical covenant so expertly championed by Mr. Abernathy, finally forced the hand of the usually cautious, often developer-friendly Harmony Creek City Council. An emergency public hearing was scheduled to address the matter of the historical covenant pertaining to Block 17, Lot 4, the Starlight Diner property, and its potential impact on proposed future development by Croft Holdings, LLC. This, we knew, was it. This was our Starlight's last stand. The City Council chambers on the evening of the hearing were packed to the absolute rafters, an unprecedented turnout for such a normally staid municipal proceeding. Every seat was filled. Residents were standing 3 deep along the walls, and an overflow crowd armed with "Save the Starlight" placards had gathered respectfully but determinedly on the town hall steps, outside their voices, occasionally drifting in through the open windows. Local news crews, and even a few regional television stations drawn by the escalating David and Goliath nature of our struggle, had set up their cameras, their bright lights adding to the already intense, almost theatrical atmosphere. Mr. Abernathy, despite his age, was magnificent. He presented our case with a calm, meticulous, almost professorial clarity, his arguments rooted firmly in legal precedent and historical fact. He detailed the unbroken chain of ownership, the diner's continuous or historically intended continuous operation as a community-focused public eatery, the undeniable legally binding nature of the 1940s covenant, specifically designed to protect such establishments from speculative demolition. Miss Perkins then spoke eloquently about the Starlight's profound, irreplaceable role in the social and cultural fabric of Harmony Creek. David Chen presented a moving slideshow of community testimonials and historical photographs, his voice filled with a young man's passionate conviction. Finally, it was my turn. My heart hammered against my ribs, but as I looked out at the sea of supportive, hopeful faces, Maria, Betty, my parents, their initial apprehension now replaced by a quiet, fierce pride, countless loyal customers, friends, and neighbors. I found my voice. I spoke not of legal clauses or property values, but of dreams of community, of the simple, sacred human need for places like the Starlight, places that nourish not just our bodies, but our souls, our sense of belonging. I spoke of what it meant to pour your life into something, to build something with love and dedication, only to see it threatened by callous, impersonal greed. Then it was Silas Croft's turn. He and his expensive, smirking city lawyer attempted to argue their case, their voices slick with condescension and veiled disdain for what they clearly considered sentimental, anti-progress foolishness. They claimed the covenant was anachronistic, unenforceable, a relic of a bygone era that had no place in a modern, forward-looking Harmony Creek. They spoke of economic revitalization, of increased tax revenues, of the inevitable march of progress that their luxury development would supposedly bring. But their arguments, so compelling in private boardrooms, sounded hollow tinny, almost obscene in this room filled with the passionate lived experience of a community fighting for its heart. The pale faces moment, when it came, was not a sudden dramatic collapse, but a slow, almost agonizing public unraveling. Under Mr. Abernathy's polite but surgically precise cross-examination, Croft's lawyer became increasingly flustered. His arguments tangled in contradictions, his carefully constructed legal edifice beginning to visibly crumble. And Silas Croft himself, when directly questioned by a newly emboldened, reform-minded councilwoman about specific documented instances of his predatory tactics against other small Harmony Creek businesses, evidence Miss Perkins had quietly strategically provided to all council members beforehand, lost his infamous composure. His face, usually so ruddy with arrogant self-assurance, began to visibly pale, then flush a dangerous mottled crimson. He stammered. He blustered, he accused, he evaded, but he could not ultimately deny the undeniable pattern of his greed. The more he spoke, the deeper the hole he dug for himself, his carefully polished public image as a civic-minded benefactor, shattering into a million irreparable pieces under the unforgiving glare of public scrutiny and the weight of his own exposed avarice. The city council's vote, when it finally came after hours of impassioned testimony and tense deliberation, felt almost anticlimactic yet profoundly electrifyingly cathartic. By a near-unanimous margin, they voted not only to formally recognize and enforce the historical covenant protecting the Starlight Diner building, but also to immediately reconstitute the long-defunct Community Heritage Board, tasking it with a comprehensive review of all similarly covenanted historic properties in Harmony Creek, a move that sent a clear, unmistakable signal that the era of unchecked predatory development in their town was perhaps finally drawing to a close. Silas Croft's ambitious multi-million-dollar luxury development plans for the entire block were not just stalled, they were for all intents and purposes dead on arrival. He sat there, a deflated, diminished figure, his face a mask of stunned, ashen disbelief, as a joyous, almost deafening roar of triumph erupted from the gallery and the crowds outside. The Starlight Diner was saved. In the weeks that followed, buoyed by an incredible outpouring of community goodwill and a series of successful Dine Out to Save the Starlight fundraising events, we were able to negotiate a new fair and, most importantly, legally ironclad long-term lease with a now deeply chastened, publicly humiliated, and suddenly far more accommodating Silas Croft, who we later learned was also facing multiple new investigations from the Town Planning Department and the Better Business Bureau regarding his other controversial property dealings. There was even quiet talk spearheaded by a coalition of grateful local business owners and private citizens, inspired by our fight of forming a community land trust to eventually collectively purchase the entire Starlight Diner building, ensuring its permanent protection and its future as a true community-owned asset. The victory celebration at the Starlight a few weeks later was a night Harmony Creek would talk about for years. The diner was packed to bursting, overflowing with joyous, laughing, triumphant residents. Maria outdid herself in the kitchen, producing an endless, groaning buffet of Starlight classics and celebratory new creations. Betty, her face beaming, seemed to be everywhere at once, effortlessly navigating the joyful chaos with her usual grace and good humor. Mr. Abernathy, Miss Perkins, David Chen, and all the incredible members of our FOSDC committee were hoisted onto shoulders, toasted as local heroes. And as I stood behind the counter, my heart almost too full for words, watching my beloved diner, my resilient community, my Starlight family literally glowing with a renewed, almost incandescent light, I knew this was the sweetest, most profound victory of all. It wasn't just about saving a building or a business. It was about saving a piece of our shared soul, about proving that even the smallest, most ordinary of lights, when fueled by courage, community, and an unshakable belief in what is right and good, can indeed push back the deepest, most encroaching darkness and shine brighter, more beautifully than ever before. Silas Croft's sweet revenge had been his attempt to extinguish our light. Ours was simply joyfully, defiantly to keep on shining.